Now, if you could please help me give a very warm welcome to our Congressman Beto O'Rourke.
Thank you all for taking some time out of your weekend to join us and participate in your democracy and get an update and some accountability from me in terms of what I'm doing to represent you and your interests in Washington, D.C. And then probably more importantly, it's a chance for me to hear directly from you and to answer questions, hear your suggestions, your ideas, get your input so that I and my team can do a better job representing you in Washington. So I really appreciate you coming out. I'm going to first introduce our team who's here today. I then want to recognize two special young people from our community who've gone above and beyond, and we want to recognize their service this morning. I'll then provide a brief update on what I have done since our last town hall, and then we'll take it from there. We'll just open the floor to some questions. Let me do this though before recognizing my team. I want to recognize Joe Moody, who's sitting to your right over here. Joe, of course, is your state representative. Joe, thanks for joining us. As you all probably know, he is busy working for us in Austin, in the state legislature, taking some time to come back to El Paso, listen to his constituents. We certainly want to recognize him and acknowledge him so that you also have a chance to talk with him as well. So Joe, we appreciate what you're doing and thank you for being here. I want to thank Ms. Morales, the principal of Coronado, for allowing us to have our town hall here. I want to thank the wonderful tech crew that has helped us organize and facilitate the meeting today. And now let me recognize our team, our staff. Cynthia Cano is our district director. She really represents this office in El Paso out of the second floor of the Mills building downtown. So whether it's constituent work, case work, folks who come in with a problem that they're having with the VA, with Social Security, with Medicaid, with Medicare, with the immigration system, problem reuniting with a family member who's stuck in Juarez, visa issues, all of those things come through Cynthia's office. And really, as a freshman member of Congress who's in the minority, the most value I can provide for you and your taxpayer dollar comes out of our local office through Cynthia and her amazing team that includes Esteban, who's right here, Mario, who I think is in the back, Mariah, who should be somewhere around here. Mariah, raise your hand if you're here. She may be in the back. We've got Omar back there as well. They're joined by literally an army of volunteers and interns. And I saw Diane earlier, Phoebe, David, Paulina, who am I leaving out in terms of interns that are here? Cassie, who's right here, who's photographing the event for us today. And then in addition, además, we're joined by Julian Aguilar, who's filming things here in the back, and Joe Gallegos, who's also filming and taking pictures. These two amazing young men are volunteering their time, do not work for the office, don't get paid, but just want to make sure that they're helping to document what's happening here in the community. So we really appreciate your efforts as well. And just want to let you know that this is the team that's representing your interests here in El Paso and is really on the front lines of public service in our community. So really a great group of people. Thank you all for what you do. In terms of the introductions, lastly, I want to introduce Mr. Mendoza. He's in the back. He's our new director of the local VHA, the Veteran Affairs system that is responsible for health care for veterans in our community. And as you all know, we have nearly or maybe over 80,000 veterans that we're serving out of this El Paso region in West Texas and southern New Mexico and within El Paso County. And it's clear that we have some significant issues and challenges to overcome within that VA system. I think it has a lot to do with lack of resources and capacity to see everyone who needs to and should be seen. And I know that Mr. Mendoza's made it his top priority to correct these things. He and I are working together to measure progress against the goals we have to make this the best performing VA system in the country. So Mr. Mendoza, I think it means a lot to all of us, especially the veterans here, that you're taking time out of your schedule to be here as well. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Now, let me do this very quickly. I want to introduce two very remarkable young people who, with their parents, have taken some time to join us today. The first person I want to recognize is Michael Myers. And Michael is a young man, told me he plays center for his football team, who 2 years ago lost his best lifelong friend in a tragic fire that also killed his friend's brother and sister, grandfather and grandmother. And his friend Isaiah, whom he played football with, whom he grew up with, was obviously someone who was very special to Michael. And Michael took this tragedy and turned it around and tried to produce something positive from it. And he's written a book called Isaiah about his relationship and friendship with Isaiah. And also the book contains a message to young people about fire safety. And he's donating a significant portion of the proceeds to families who've been affected by house fires, and is doing a great public service to our community to go to schools to talk about his relationship with Isaiah, the danger of playing with fire and some of the horrific consequences if you do. So, Michael, we really appreciate what you've done for our community. We want to present you with this certificate that recognizes the community's appreciation for what you've done. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's hear it from Michael Myers. Isaiah and Michael as they've been growing up together over the years. If you'd like to look at it, they'll be here through the duration of the program today. So thank you for joining us. Appreciate it. Thank you for your service. Our next young person is really young, younger than I realized when I was reading her biography. She's 5 years old, and as the father of a 6-year-old, I feel like I'm being put to shame here. But Zoe Quintana was asked what she wanted to do for her birthday. And in response, she said she wanted to collect clothing and shoes for kids who didn't have these things that we take for granted in our day-to-day life. And so she is conducting a clothing and shoe drive for children who are at the Child Crisis Center. And on April 2nd, her birthday, she's going to turn over everything that she's collected to the Child Crisis Center, and that's going to be how she celebrates her birthday. It's not Chuck E. Cheese or Peter Piper, which my kids would be asking for. It's giving back to others in our community. So Zoe, we really appreciate what you've done, and we want to give you this certificate as well. Zoe, thank you very much. Let's hear it for Zoe. And I want to thank the members. Esteban just told me, Zoe goes to Thomas Manor Elementary. If you would like to donate clothing, shoes for children at the Child Crisis Center, you can contact Zoe through Thomas Manor Elementary or drop off directly there. And I know she would appreciate it. I think that would make her birthday even more special. So I want to thank these amazing young people in our community. I want to thank Esteban and the other members of our staff who read their stories or heard about them when they called into the office, and make sure that we recognize them today. So let me give you a really quick update, and then we'll turn it over to what I think is the most effective part of these town halls, which is to hear directly from you. And by the way, I've been in the office for all of 8 weeks so far, so I'm by no means an expert. I'm going to do my best to tell you what I know and be as responsive as I can. As Cynthia said, we'll write down every question that is asked. If you do not receive a straight answer today, or if I'm unable to provide the answer to your question, we will get back to you. And in the 8 weeks that I've been in office so far, this is our 4th town hall meeting. We're holding one a month, and we're now into our 3rd month. We're at the beginning of March. We've held one at Riverside, we held one at Urban last month, and we're here at Coronado today. And then quarterly, we hold a town hall specific to veterans issues. So 2 weeks ago, we held one at Casa Vida on Waco. We want to thank Ben Bass for hosting us, specific to veterans issues, and we'll continue to do that. So what I try to do with these town halls is tell you what our office has done and what has happened in Congress that's of any significance since I last spoke to you. And it's only been about 2 weeks since I was at Urban, so I'll give you an update from that point. If you want to know anything that happened before then, I'm also happy to answer those questions as well. The big issue right now in Congress, and I know you all know this, and maybe even are sick of hearing about it, but I think it's really important, is this concept called the sequester. which I don't know the etymology or the derivation of that word. I heard someone say that it derives from the Latin for hostage or for holding hostage, which certainly seems to make sense when you think about how this is played out politically. But really it's a fancy word for automatic, across-the-board budget cuts or spending cuts. And it affects every single federal agency, even those that have some protections built in, like the VA. Every federal agency, every federal employee, and every one of us American citizens who depend on these federal services is affected. And as you probably know, this came out of the Budget Control Act, a piece of legislation that passed in the summer of 2011 that was an attempt to get the spending in our country back into control, the $16 trillion of debt that we have under control, and the $1 trillion annual deficits that we're bringing up under control. And I can't argue with the intent of trying to do that. We certainly have a spending problem in this country. And we're certainly burdening our kids and our grandkids and the generations to come with some enormous debt that they're going to have to pay back. It's going to make it very hard for them to be productive, to invest in those things that you'd otherwise want them putting money into. And there was this idea that there were going to be these across-the-board spending cuts unless Congress could figure out an alternative, hopefully, in my opinion, a balance of spending cuts and revenue increases or tax increases, to call them what they are, to make sure that we get our budget balanced and under control. As you know, Congress has been unable to do this. They've addressed the revenue part of this right before my Congress took office in January, with tax increases for those families making over $450,000 a year, or those individuals making over $400,000 a year. The spending side was less successful, and so the sequester went into effect at the beginning of this month. And there was a very important vote that I and the rest of Congress took this week that tried to address the impacts of the sequester and the need to fund government services. Congress, especially the other side, the Senate, the President, and the House have been unable to agree on a budget now for more than 3 years. So we're operating under what's called a continuing resolution, or they call it a CR in Congress. And it basically means all federal programs and agencies are funded at the same level as the previous fiscal year. So there are no increases. And so the CR that was presented to us to vote on Wednesday, I believe it was, of this week, basically has the same spending levels with the inclusion of the sequester, which has these across-the-board cuts of 2.4%, and without getting into the weeds or the math of this, when those 2.4% cuts make their way through the system, they can end up taking 20% out of the average federal employee's paycheck. So these sequester cuts went into effect. Most of us can agree that that's bad. I know that some of us have an image of some federal waste and mismanagement, and certainly that exists. No one can argue that. We can always do a better job. We can always trim our budgets a little bit more. We can always be more efficient and more effective with your tax dollars. But the people that we're talking about cutting their salaries and the salaries that their families depend on are the people who provide services to our armed services, to our veterans, whether at the hospitals, the clinics, the civilian workers at Fort Bliss. They are the men and the women who man our ports of entry. They are the men and the women who man the line for the Border Patrol. They are the folks who work at La Tuna. They are people who are funded by federal dollars at El Paso International Airport. We have conservatively estimated about 20,000 federal employees affected by the sequester in El Paso. And that means their families are affected. And that means those of us who may not be federal employees or in the families of federal employees, but who depend on their spending, are affected. So this is really serious. What the continuing resolution that I voted on offered me, and why I broke with the ranks of my fellow Democrats and voted for it, even though it was introduced by Republicans, even though it contained the sequester for most federal agencies, was a carve-out for defense and many of the jobs that depend on defense spending, including those at Fort Bliss. It included a carve-out for Customs and Border Protection and the men and women who work within that agency. And it contained a carve-out for the VA. And when I say a carve-out, it fully funded the VA and DOD for the rest of this fiscal year. It's an appropriations bill. And for CBP, they call it, in the legislative office, in our office, they call it a rifle shot. It was something that was sent in there to get members like myself to vote for it. And while I think the sequester is terrible because it affects all those people I told you it's going to affect, including Head Start teachers, including kids who depend on Head Start programs, including tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in our community, I could not vote against the interests of those people who will be employed at Fort Bliss, who are employed by the CBP, who depend on services at the VA. It was a very, very tough vote to take. And we spent a lot of time in the office talking about this, reading through the bill, finding out if there was any way to vote against this and hope for something better. And ultimately I decided there was not, that this was an imperfect thing, and I could not allow the perfect to become the enemy of the good. And this was something that was, by comparison, going to be good for El Paso or better than the alternative. So that leaves us in a place where we have protected those agencies that I've talked about, not fully. There's still going to be some cuts in those areas, and there's still enough uncertainty there that it's going to make it hard for those of us in El Paso who depend on those services or who work there. And then we have the sequester for those other parts of the federal government. So my job as your representative going forward over the next 6 months of this fiscal year is to see if I can't work with Democrats and Republicans alike to identify more sensible cuts, areas where we might be able to raise some revenues. And when I say revenues, it is tax increases, but I think we have the ability to raise these revenues through cutting loopholes. And this is not a Democrat or Republican idea. I mean, in fact, it's one that Mitt Romney raised in the presidential campaign. But you have loopholes for energy extraction and production. You have loopholes for those who buy and lease corporate jets. You have loopholes for every single imaginable enterprise in this country, all run through the tax code. And I think there's a way to find some revenues and close some of these loopholes and do a better job of balancing our budget and not slash federal departments, federal workers, and families across the board. I think that's an inhumane way to do it. So, I think that's the single greatest issue facing the country right now. On the positive side, at least in my opinion, is this opportunity we have once we get out of governing by crisis, which seems to have been the case for at least the last year and a half in Congress. These debt ceilings, these fiscal cliffs, these sequesters, these continuing resolutions. Once we get past that, which I'm hopeful we will over the next 6 months, Congress, the President, and the Senate have all indicated they want to turn their attention to comprehensive immigration reform. And whatever you think the solution is to our immigration problems today in this country, I think everyone in this room can agree we have a problem. We have laws on the books that aren't being followed. We have people who are working in this country, in many cases paying taxes, who are working in the shadows, who aren't being recognized. We have families that are separated, American citizens here, their spouses or family members in other countries, including Mexico, who cannot be reunited. And we have a need to bring our laws in line with our values, in line with reality, in line, frankly, with our economic self-interest in this country. I sit on the Homeland Security Oversight Committee, and I think I have a unique opportunity there to bring El Paso's perspective to bear on this issue. And as you may have heard, one of the so-called triggers that's being proposed for moving forward with comprehensive immigration reform is further securing the border. And the difficulty in that notion is no one has defined border security. We live in the safest city in the United States today, 3 years running. San Diego, another large border community, is the second safest. Honolulu, Hawaii, if you think about it, is a maritime border city. New York City, a city of immigrants, a frontline immigrant city, is in the top 10 safest cities. These are not coincidences or accidents. I think it's directly correlated to the positive contribution that immigrants play in our community. And I think it's also a testament to the fact that we have great federal law enforcement, local law enforcement, and good communities along the border that keep America and the border safe. The border is as secure as it has ever been. We're spending $18 billion a year, your tax money, to secure that border, twice what we were spending in 2006. We've more than doubled the size of the Border Patrol. We have 10 drones flying the 2,000-mile border from Brownsville to San Diego today. We have 600 miles of border wall that costs us billions of dollars to construct and maintain going forward. My argument is I don't know that we can take any more border security in this country, either from a fiscal responsibility standpoint or the fact that ultimately that begins to sap resources from other federal programs, including those that speed legitimate, safe traffic through our ports of entry, on which tens of thousands of jobs in El Paso depend. So look forward to playing a positive role in this immigration reform debate. And I think, as I've just kind of outlined, I think El Paso's got a really unique, positive, powerful story to tell. On veterans issues, very proud to serve on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and I'm serving on the Oversight Subcommittee on the VA. We have just had a number of really powerful joint hearings with the Senate VA Committee. Some of these held in the Senate side, some of these held on the House side, where we heard from every major veterans service organization in America. We've heard from the VFW, and we've heard from 3 or 4 dozen other major service organizations about their priorities. And their priorities are no different than those that I've heard you talk about here in El Paso. It's the 22 veteran suicides a day that are taking place right now in this country. Absolutely unacceptable. It's the high number of homeless veterans that we have in our communities. More than 200 accounted for here in El Paso alone, and a lot of people think that's an underestimate. The need to provide better access to what is, by and large, good health care delivered at the VA system. The need to get our benefit claims response times down to about 125 days, which is the goal of Secretary Shinseki. Right now, any of you who have filed a claim or are waiting for a response on a filed claim know that that's not the case. And you're waiting months longer than 125 days, sometimes years longer. And so getting that down to a more reasonable level. Workforce transition, taking active duty military who performed heroically in Afghanistan and Iraq, translating their service, their experience, and their skills into a resume here in El Paso that will land them a job and allow them to be a productive member of our community. We've also co-signed a number of important veterans bills. I mentioned 4 or 5 last time. One that I've signed since then is the Blue Water Vietnam Veterans Act to make sure that those Vietnam-era veterans who never served on land but were in the waters around Vietnam and were exposed to Agent Orange are covered the same way that those veterans who served on land were. We have veterans benefits legislation that we co-sponsored that makes sure that veterans, their spouses, their beneficiaries are treated fairly in the system. And then we've also co-signed a bill to make sure that these budget crises, many of them manufactured, don't affect veterans, and that VA funding or VA budgets are set out 2 years in advance going forward, a little bit the way the Texas legislature works with Joe. Esteban, who's got the microphone here, if you'll raise your hands, he'll recognize you. He'll come on up with a microphone and make sure that you get a chance to have your question addressed.
Morning, Congressman.
Good morning.
I'm sure we were all listening. And I want everybody to be aware that when he was talking about key legislation, he talked about how he and his staff actually read it. We don't want to know how many senators and congressmen will fall on these things and they never even read it. He knows what's going on because he gives it them and because he'll actually read these things. It makes a difference. You gotta know, and when you read it, you know. And in terms of the bill he spoke about, a Republican bill that would have made a positive difference for this sequester stuff that's got us all right there. Granted, he knew about days, if you break rank with your party, there's some fool back there ready to build a scaffold and have you dangling from it. That's not good, but it's real. There are too many people who don't pay attention to what's real. We have here a congressman who does. He not only has the brains and the perception, he's got the stone, point blank. He's got the raw guts to do what has to be done. And if you were listening, he did this for two closely related reasons. He felt that was better for his constituents here, and he felt it was better for the American people as a whole. Now, what the other people had in mind, I don't know, and I don't want to go there. But I think we have what we need, which is somebody not only with the brains, but with the guts to do what's right.
We're going to keep the rest of these comments PG.
Congressman Beto, thank you very much for being here. I too want to echo, congratulate you for voting against party lines for what's best for your constituents. I also want to commend you for your efforts to try and do something about the election laws and the contributions instead of wasting your time on gun control. And you can correct me on this. It's my understanding sequester just stops the future spending cuts, not a cut in actual spending. But the heart of my question is, it's my understanding, my personal supplemental Medicare insurance has doubled here in the last 3 years. And it's my understanding that we're going to have an $800 million cut to Medicare. So how can we spend $400 million to Egypt to give them money when they won't even give us the plan today, and we're going to cut? And now we're talking about all these cuts we're having to the veterans. How can we cut? How can we give $400 million to Egypt?
Great question. Let me address a couple of things that you said. And the first is on the sequester. It will actually cut not just future spending, but current spending and reduce it. And by the way, by the time it makes its way down to the individual employee and his family, those are up to 20% cuts, and that's one unpaid day a week. We have a good friend, for example, who's a federal public defender, and she and her family came over for dinner last night. And she said, starting tomorrow, every Friday is off and it's unpaid. And so that's one day less in terms of her work product for the community and the country. It's also one day less that she's going to be paid. And so her family's going to have to find a way to make ends meet around that. In terms of foreign aid spending, you bring up a good point. And while as a percentage of what we spend in this country, a $3.5 trillion budget, it's pretty small. It's around 1%. I don't think that it's been well spent so far. You mentioned Egypt, where we propped up a ruthless dictator for decades. And not only did we not make the world a better place for doing so, I think we engendered generations of Egyptians who hate America because they saw us, this country of democracy, giving billions of dollars to one of the worst dictators in the region. Pakistan, we spent billions of dollars there. The Pakistanis like us no more today than before we spent the first time, and probably much less than before we began to spend there. So I think we need to prioritize our foreign spending much better. Certainly we should not stop doing that, but we really have to have some greater accountability for how that money is spent and what the value is for the U.S. taxpayer. $2 billion to Mexico in Planned Maryland, which sends the Mexican government money, which they then use to buy Black Hawk helicopters from the manufacturers here in the United States, among other things. And there's some good uses of that Planned Maryland, but just some additional examples. Your specific question about Medicare, that's one I want to get back to you in writing to make sure that I address it. A big part of the President's Affordable Care Act cost savings plan is to reduce the growth rate of Medicare. And by and large, over the last couple of years, we've actually seen significant reductions in the rate of growth there. But I want to make sure that I address your question squarely. So we'll get that to you in writing. And I think it's one of enough general interest that we'll also post that on our website as well. So thank you for asking.
Thank you for your good job.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. I graduated from this high school here 16 years ago. U.S. Army veteran. For the last 5 years, I've been in an abusive relationship. I know on the vote for the Violence Against Women Act, but what's being done to help protect men like me who keep falling through the cracks, keep being told we don't have any injuries because we're not actively bleeding, that we've been laughed at by police officers when filing our reports.
First of all, thank you for your service. Thank you for your question. That's a difficult question to ask in a forum like this one. And let me tell you, I met with our district attorney, Jaime Esparza, and I met with him specifically about domestic abuse issues. And he's made it clear to me that there's no distinction, nor should there be, when it comes to gender or any other distinction that you might find, because if you're abused or hurt in a relationship, we need to be there to help you. And we also need to be there to prosecute that person who's committing these crimes so that they cannot do it again. I think the Violence Against Women Act, which passed the previous week along bipartisan lines, it was a Republican and democratically supported issue, specifically addressed people within the LGBT community, people on Native American reservations, and immigrant populations that before now were not afforded those same protections. So I certainly think they should extend to men as well. And if you'd like, I'd be happy when we conclude at 10, I'd be happy with my staff to sit down with you a little bit and make sure that we understand the nature of your case and see if there's anything we can do to help. So thank you for telling us about your issue. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Thank you for your service and for your courage. I know up there in Washington can be very stressful, but I know they got a medication for that. So this morning, I want to talk to you a little bit about TRICARE, which affects a lot of our veterans, our widows, and our soldiers. TRICARE is changing over to United Medical or something, which comes into effect, I think, the 1st of April. But the new policy that we would like for you to look into it is for the surrounding areas of El Paso. You're talking about Sierra Blanca, Van Horn, Del City, and Las Cruces, which some of these veterans and widows and our brothers and sisters is going to affect. And maybe you leading the road to look into this or investigate this is going to hurt them. The new policy is that if you're 40 miles away from a military training facility and you will have TRICARE Prime, they're giving you the on-the-go standard. Now, these guys have been paying their monies on TRICARE Prime so they get the best health care. But if they change the standard, that means that when they do an appointment, they go and, they form a line. This is not right. And I would like for your office and for your legislative guys over there to really look into this TRICARE policy change. It's not right. And we're going to have a lot of our disabled brothers and sisters, our veteran active duty, they're going to affect them. And if you're doing a great job representing our soldiers and veterans, and thank you for that. But I would like for you to check into that.
You will. Thank you. And thank you for doing that program.
Hi. Okay, we're part of the school right now, and we're only freshmen, so we don't know a whole lot. So I'm sorry if I sound completely ignorant. Currently, we are trying to get involved involved in our school and trying to really get an input on what the people are saying. Because a lot of students actually, they care about what goes on, but they don't know how to get involved. So we were wondering if you have any suggestions of how we can get involved in our school and, get our voice heard.
First of all, thanks for coming out. To be in high school, to be a freshman, and to be here at 9 a.m. on Saturday morning is really impressive. So thank you. I feel very confident that you will figure out how to be involved and engaged civically. Just by the fact that you're here shows me that given all the opportunities there are in the community, you will find one. But if I could tell you, Gary Berglund here at Coronado is a big hero of mine. He and his students put on the most impressive forums and debates of the congressional campaign, both in the primary and in general. And the students, your fellow students here at Coronado, the questions they asked, really tough questions, and the manner in which they conducted and produced these debates was really amazing. So I would point you in his direction and in those civics or government classes that put these on. I think coming to public meetings like this one, going to city council meetings, finding out how your government works, how it is representing, or in some cases not representing your interests, how it's spending your tax dollars, I think is a very powerful way to become engaged. And then to, as you just did at a council meeting, at a town hall like this, stand up and speak about those issues that you care about. And you may be surprised to find that the elected officials are interested and care about what you say and are impacted and affected by some of the things that you may ask or talk about. It may impact the decisions that they end up making. So those are just some suggestions. El Paso Times every day in the Borderlands section publishes a list of all public meetings, from PSB, school board, community college, city council, to meetings like this one. So I think attend those, get involved in journalism, actually cover these issues, analyze them, stay engaged. And last thing I'll tell you is we have, we talked about all the interns who joined us today that we're so excited about. Some of those interns are in high school. And like you, they're curious, they're interested, they want to take an active role in the betterment of their community. You're always welcome to apply for an internship with our office, and if things work out, we'd love to have you join the team. So thanks for your question. Stefan's up here coming around the microphone.
Congressman O'Rourke, on behalf of letter carriers, we request for you to co-sponsor House Resolution 30 and H.R. 630 for the following reasons. Postal Service doesn't use taxpayer funds. It's funded by sales of stamps, products, and services. Small businesses depend on the USPS for mail service on weekends. The USPS is a central part of a $1.3 trillion national mailing industry, employing 7.5 million private sector workers. The Postal Service offers Americans the most efficient and affordable service in the world. Mail service is written in the Constitution as a federal duty. It has bound our country together and unified communities. Rural towns and elderly rely on universal 6-day service. 1/4 of letter carriers are military veterans. Degrading service and dismantling the network to include eliminating 6-day delivery and door-to-door mail service would inconvenience millions of Americans and small businesses, forcing consumers to use more expensive private delivery services. We hope that you'll support the letter carriers and the Postal Service. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. We will definitely look at HR 30. We're making a note to that effect right now. And I know that there are some unique issues with your department in that, unlike any other federal agency, you're required to pre-fund health and pension obligations at a rate and extent that no other federal department is. And so I want to make sure that we're treating every federal employee equally and fairly. So thank you for bringing that to our attention.
The word is order. I'm John Van Diemen, and thank you very much for the last town hall meeting. I received it yesterday in my email. I appreciate it. Great. It was about HR 45 and talk about inflation. You said a low rate was shy of your The subject is solar electricity. To keep, you heard about the green, keep things green, keep all this. Okay. When people install solar panels, electric solar panels for hot water, they get a federal credit on their income tax. My question to you, sir, is when does this dry up and blow away? Because the city is handling the electric company in 15, it will dry up and blow away. Because remember, Madam Bird said one day last year, she says, I want to make El Paso the solar capital of the world. So, when will this go away, or will it stay around for how long, sir? Thank you very much. And by the way, I get more out of you than out of your predecessor, and I'm a Republican.
Thank you. Thanks for your question. Let me share some interesting news. And this is really hard for me to believe, but this is straight from the horse's mouth. I had a meeting in Washington with the CEO of El Paso Electric. And he said that for the first time in his life, the first time in the history of this utility, solar energy production is now competitive with fossil fuel energy production at 5.9 cents a kilowatt hour. Which, again, is very hard for me to believe. The prevailing wisdom has always been that solar is uncompetitive and that you invest in solar because there's a mandate from the government, because you're wanting to be environmentally conscious and friendly. It now makes business sense for El Paso Electric to invest in solar. This is directly from the CEO. He is also in partnership with Fort Bliss, which I'm very proud to learn is trying to become energy independent, net zero by 2020. And they've even moved that up to say that they're going to try to do it by 2017 or 2018. If Fort Bliss does that, it'll be the largest energy independent community in the world. It'll be right here in El Paso, Texas. That's really something for us to be proud of. And beyond the economics of it, which you rightly bring up, and the fact that, yes, in some cases, state, local, and federal governments subsidize energy production from renewable sources, wind, geothermal, sun. Let's also remember that we subsidize energy production from fossil fuels. If you're drilling a well, if you're fracking, wherever you're producing or generating energy, there's a government subsidy tied to that. I think the additional criteria that we should look at when we're looking at energy production is independence from those people who do not have our best interests at heart. So, do we want to be importing energy from Venezuela? Do we want to be importing energy from Saudi Arabia? Do we want to be coming through the Persian Gulf and through the Straits of Hormuz and be subject to, the threats and terrorism of Iran? Or do we want to be generating that production here in our country, even in our local communities? So, those are some of the factors I think we should consider when we're doing this. And then your last question of when will this blow away? When will we stop subsidizing production? I think you raised a really good issue. And we subsidize so many things through our tax code. Energy production. I talked about buying corporate jets. When you buy a home, when you have a kid. All of those things are incentivized or subsidized through the tax code. And it has become such a complex, bizarre piece of legislation that most of us need to hire people in order to file our returns. I really think there's something to be said in this time of budget crisis and trying to come to consensus between the two parties to put every subsidy, loophole, and incentive on the table and really see if we want to encourage those things through the tax code or whether we can take some of those out and eventually even lower rates for the rest of us. So you asked a really important question. I appreciate it, and I think that's the way forward. When is the come-up date? I don't know. There is. Let me give you a vehicle through which this discussion can happen. Paul Ryan, who is the chair of the Budget Committee, is going to present his budget later this month. And that budget has a 10-year timeline to basically balance the federal budget and remove the deficit. To do that, he will have to cut services and expenditures, and I hope raise revenues, and raise revenues can be a straight-up tax increase or it could be closing some of these loopholes. I think that would be the vehicle for this discussion. So within this month, you may start to see this discussion happen.
And at this point, we have time for one, hopefully two more questions.
Yeah, and before we hear this question from Susie, let me just say this. We'll take one more question after Susie's, then we'll wrap up. Then I will stay for about 30 or 40 minutes, and some of you may have questions that you weren't able to ask publicly or don't want to ask publicly, so I'll stay around for that. But then I've got to be downtown at First Baptist. It's the last game of the First Baptist Leopards, my 6-year-old's basketball team, so I got to be there for that game. So I've got a hard game.
Good morning, Beto. Thank you again for being here. And I'm here representing the American Federation of Government Employees, as well as the El Paso Central Labor Union. And I'd like to start off by you perhaps giving us some hope, which seems to be the only thing we have left here. We're having a really hard time believing this thing about sequestration and furlough, that it's actually going to happen in a time of these budget cuts when we have all these contractors working within our facilities and so forth. So we would like an explanation from you, perhaps helping us understand the logic between them. And number two, we also understand that you've had a couple of meetings with the hospital commander, William Beaumont, a couple of coffee meetings and so on and so forth. And so I would just like to know if any of those conversations included the union and the job creation or hiring freeze and all that negative stuff going on, because we haven't heard anything from him in reference to how those meetings went about. And lastly, I would like to also thank you for always mentioning unions and all that you do. I've been looking at some of your interviews within the media, and I really appreciate that, and we thank you for that.
Thank you for your question. So, how do we address the sequester, and how do we take it from an abstraction? 2.4% across the board cuts in a budget of $3.5 trillion. Who could argue against that? 2.4%? I could cut 2.4% out of my home budget, my office budget, my business's budget. It might not be the easiest thing to do, but I can do it. Why are Democrats and people who are against the sequester having such a hard time with this? So my role in this is to share your story and the stories of many others in this community who every single day perform world-class service on behalf of the federal taxpayer. Again, whether it's at William Beaumont, whether it's at the VA clinic, whether it's putting their lives on the line on the front line as border patrol officers or customs officers at our ports of entry, whether it's the guards at La Tuna. These are middle-class working Americans who are going to take an almost 1/5 pay cut going forward. It's not an abstraction to them. How do you pay your mortgage when 20% less is coming in? How do you feed your family? Do you still go out to restaurants? Are you going to be able to take that family vacation this summer? So what I have done, again, an 8-week, been in there 8 weeks, freshman in the minority party. What I've started to do is use a privilege as a member of Congress to speak on the floor of the House in my floor speeches and talk about the working families who will be affected by this. And to acknowledge the very real concern that prompted the sequester. We are spending ineffectively in this country. We are racking up deficits and debts that, you and I would be okay with, frankly. I mean, we can continue to pay the interest on those debts and live a good life and retire fairly well. It is really going to be our kids and our grandkids as the interest payments and the amount of that debt balloons, who the payments to that will crowd out every other federal discretionary spending that they have. So it means, poorer education systems, poorer defense, everything that we depend on. So that's one way that I think I can address this, because, I'm reading the paper, our Senator, John Cornyn, man that I want to have a good relationship with, and I want to be respectful to, and I want to take his word on his face that he's concerned about spending, and that's why he supports the sequester. But when he says that this is not going to have a big impact and that we're stoking fears and anxiety and this is all a big show, I want him to meet you and to know that you're going to be taking 20% home to your family and still being required to perform the same job. And that's not fair. So that's one way that we can address it. And, I've got to think, as he hears from you, as other members of Congress hear from you and people like you in their home districts, they'll realize it's not just 2.4%, it's not an abstraction, it's a very real world cut to their quality of life, to their ability to provide for their family. When it comes to meeting with those who are responsible for managing and operating our federal facilities here, whether it's GSA, whether it's ports infrastructure, whether it's our hospital, or whether it's the Corps of Engineers that are building out all these new facilities. Initially, we just had introductory meetings to introduce ourselves, and actually I didn't get a chance to attend those William Beaumont meetings, but it was really an opportunity for my legislative team to meet them, just make sure that they got a chance to talk to each other. As I told Mr. Ferris, and as I told you all when you came to visit me in Washington, D.C., when we begin to have substantive meetings about changes that we'd like to see, improvements that we'd like to see in those areas, you all will definitely be at the table. And I'll tell you, when we met with Colonel Kling, who heads up the Corps of Engineers out of Fort Worth, Texas, and is responsible for all military construction in this region, we really pressed the case that we didn't think that the local workforce, the civilian workforce, and local small businesses especially were getting enough the positive economic impact of this construction as we should. We're excited about $6 billion in construction over the last 6 years. What we're not excited about is El Paso firms and their employees have really gotten the crumbs, and the vast majority of the value of those contracts has gone right out of town, out-of-state contractors and their employees. And so we certainly made that point, but I told him, look, I'm not here to complain, and I don't want to whine about this. I've told you what our concern is. Now let's work together so that we make sure that we're competitive going forward. So we'll make sure that you guys are at those future meetings. Thanks for raising that issue. We have time for one more question, and then again, I will stay for 30 to 40 minutes. Yes, sir.
Yes, I think everybody who is at least 58 years old, we are veterans from Vietnam. And when we returned, we didn't get any credit. But at this point, we are trying to use the VA, and there is not enough staff to do medical services. I used my GI Bill to go to Mexico and get a degree in medicine. Then I came back to the United States and worked for the Department of Justice, and I worked in Latuna for 20 years. When I started working there 20 years ago, we used to have $80,000 inmates in the federal system. Now we have over 160,000 inmates, without counting those in the halfway houses, parole, and other things. So about 6 or 7 years ago, I read an article that we are spending $23,000 for every inmate in the federal system. Why do we have to spend so much money for somebody that for every 10 inmates that they go out to the street, 9 came back in less than 2 or 3 weeks because they committed another crime? So I think when we used to have the services that we used to have this, what they call it, law, that we had to be enlisted, by the trust. Now with this new generation, most of the kids, of the new generation, they have a police record because it is for them it's a proud thing to be in jail or to be in a gang or to do this or that. I think we need to change that because this country is going down to, excuse my language, it's going down to the kids. Why? Because these generations, they don't know how to conserve, how to preserve. They really don't know how hard we work to build this country. I was born in Mexico and I came back to the United States when I was 18 or 19 years old. And I have been working since then. And last week or 2 days ago, I saw in the news that they opened 15-unit housing with $1.7 million budget from the federal system. I had been proposing a housing unit for 46 elderly people that I need $1.5 million to build it. 4 times cheaper than whatever they spent last week to build these 15 apartments. Why? Because the money is going to somebody else. They are going to somebody else. I'm not winning about it. But I have been trying to do for the last 6 years something for our community. And I always have a politician or somebody who doesn't like what I wanted to do for our community. What's the question? So my question is, how can I get somebody honest in the system to help me to do something for our community, because we are a lot of people that we wanted to do something for our community. Thank you for your help.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your question. Thank you for your service. We will work with you specifically on your question about providing housing for the elderly in our community. We'll work with you on that and make sure that we understand your application. And then if you're not getting straight answers from Housing and Urban Development, make sure that we get those for you. And I don't obviously know enough about the specific case, but I appreciate your interest in providing a public service. And just very quickly, since you touched on it, we do really have an incarceration problem in this country. We're 5% of the world's population, but we incarcerate more people in this country than any other country in the world. And you think about China, you think about Russia, you think about Iran, you think about Egypt. We incarcerate more of our own citizens than any of those other countries. And that's really something to be ashamed of, and I am. And it's really something to explore in terms of what the causes are and to make sure that we correct it when we spend more on these prisoners and these inmates and our system of incarceration than we do on public education, and making sure that this wonderful Coronado freshman has every opportunity and resource available to her so that she's successful in life. There are a lot of reasons for this. I mean, I think some of it is economic opportunity. You talked about the badge of honor that some, especially young men, wear when they go through the penal system, when they don't have educational or economic opportunities available to them. A lot of it is, frankly, personal responsibility and the need for us as families and individuals to do better and to hold ourselves accountable for a higher level of conduct. But I'd be remiss if I didn't say that a lot of it has to do with our drug laws in this country. And 40 years into $1 trillion war on drugs, whose goal was to keep drugs away from kids, to keep the profits away from the cartels and the bad guys, and to eradicate drugs from our streets, we have failed on every measure. And it doesn't matter what you think we should do next, you cannot argue those facts. And part of the consequence is that we have this ballooning federal prison population of, again, mostly young men who are in prison for a nonviolent transactional offense, who now that they are in prison, learn how to be better criminals, come out with a record, are harder to employ, are unable to go to school, sometimes can't vote and participate in civic life. So you can imagine the options that are open to them going forward. It's why I think we need to have a principled, honest discussion about the drug laws in this country, decide what it is we want to achieve. And I certainly agree as a father of 3 young kids that I don't want our kids to have access to drugs, but unfortunately today they do. I agree that we don't want money going to the cartels so they can do those horrible things they're doing in Mexico, but today billions, $8 billion a year is sent south to fund the violence and the terror that we see there. And I agree that our prison population is too large, but it's only getting bigger. So, we don't have to go into too much more detail on that, but I want you to know that I recognize the problem. It's a cost to us fiscally, it's a cost to us morally, it's a cost to this country ethically, and it's a cost in terms of the human resources and the intellectual capital that's rotting in those prisons today instead of thriving in colleges and universities and the productive labor force. So, really good question. Obviously, it's going to take a much larger national conversation to fix, but I'm glad you raised the issue. With that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to our town hall today. Really appreciate it is a huge honor to represent you and your interests in Washington, D.C. Look forward to continuing to do that for the rest of this term at least. And we will be here, not here, but we'll be at another high school next month with an additional town hall forum. Hope to see you there if you're interested. Thanks again, everybody. Thanks for coming.